Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is the weekend review show for November 15th through the 17th, 2019. We're going to walk through the top 10 here at the box office. We have three new wide releases: Ford versus Ferrari, Charlie's Angels, and The Good Liar from Warner Brothers. We will do deeper dives on those and then talk about the rest of the top 10. Also, some limited releases that are out there. It is award season, so we're going to talk about those as well. Parasite, Jojo Rabbit. Then we're going to have Chris doing the Time Machine segment here with this weekend back in 1989. A really fascinating weekend with a couple of movies nobody remembers. Then he's going to talk about some three new movies that are coming out that just got greenlit. Pay attention to the Nicolas Cage one. Sounds really fascinating. A little meta movie. And then we'll close up the show talking about what's going to come out over the next few weeks at the box office. But let's dive into the top 10 here. Number one this weekend was a new wide release, Ford versus Ferrari from 20th Century Fox, which is now technically Disney, right? $31 million this weekend. Fantastic performance. I mean, really strong. Think about this. It's an adult drama that's opening to $30 million. Like, that was kind of normal 15, 20 years ago, but it has not been normal for like the last 10 years at least. So this is a huge win for Disney and 20th Century Fox. I wonder if they're going to keep calling stuff 20th Century Fox, or it's all going to become just like Disney branded stuff, or it's all distributed by Disney. I don't know if they're going to keep the film division separate. In any event, this is probably one of the last films ever produced by that solo studio, 20th Century Fox. So a huge win for them. They must be very happy. $31 million for this is phenomenal. It was tracking in sort of like the mid 20s. I think the hope from Disney and Fox was that it would probably do mid 20s, but have a very good multiplier, like a 3x, 4x multiplier, just because it has that prestige going for it. This is essentially a grand slam for the film. Let's walk through what the critics are saying about this, because this is why it's doing so well. 92% on Rotten Tomatoes right now from all critics, a 78 actual score, both very high. Top critics gave it a 91% and a 75 score, also fantastic. Here's where it gets amazing. Verified audience score of a 99% fresh. With a 96 actual score. All audiences is essentially the same, 97% fresh, 94. Let's talk about that real quick. So critics are gushing about it, and the general audience are over the moon about it. That they love this film. You will not see scores like this for a major release. Probably, I mean, I can't remember the last one that came out that had a 99% verified audience score for like a mass release wide audience film. You'll see it every once in a while, maybe with sort of like the faith-based films or a film where it has a built-in audience that's going to love it no matter what. This is not the case with something like this. This is sort of a test for general audiences. They didn't know what it was going to be going in, and they absolutely loved it. I've heard people have like been clapping at the end and standing ovations and stuff like that. So this is a huge boon for the performance of this film. Cinema Score verifies all of this, by the way. A+ cinema score. How often throughout the year do we get an A+? Maybe 5-6 times for a major release like this. Very rare. So the legs on this, the multiplier here, again, the multiplier is the opening weekend. How much is it going to do total domestic? Is it going to be 2x opening weekend, 3x, 4x? Traditionally, a film's about 2.7x is the normal. This is right now with a cinema score of an A, and this has been proven. There's been data studies showing, every sort of A+ cinema score has a higher multiple than normal. For a film like this that's just opening as we start the award season, and it's going to play strong for the next 2 months, I would say the basement here is a 4x multiple. So this thing's going to push way past $100 million domestically. Overseas, I'm not sure what it's going to do. A different type of audience. Are they going to sort of relate to this storyline as well? I think that they will, because people love American cars and that whole storied history behind them. So I think it's going to do quite well, but domestically it's going to be a very high performer. Post-track score of a 90%. So every single data point that we have is telling us that people are loving this film. A 68% definite recommend. Which I thought would be a little bit higher. I thought it'd be in the 70s, but maybe I've been misreading that recently, because I thought like anything, something like this with like an A+ cinema score, I would assume would be like 75-80% definite recommend, but I could be wrong about that. A Letterboxd score of a 78, very high with the film snobs. Compared to First Man, which was a 74. That's an interesting case, First Man, because that group of people, the sort of film Twitter, film snob people loved First Man, thought it was very good because they love director, right? But the audiences did not show up for that. This is kind of like, it's winning in every single category. Your critics, your general audience, and the film snobs, they all love this movie. Battle of the Sexes, I thought was a good comp, 66, so it's way higher than that. Hidden Figures feels sort of related to this. That was a 76, so it's even higher than that. This is all in Letterboxd. Saving Mr. Banks, I thought was generally related, 68. So it's on the higher end of these sort of historical kind of biopic movies. So it's all good news right now. All good news. Did 2.1 million on the Thursday previews, which was okay. When I saw that number, I was like, okay, that's fine. This isn't going to be a Thursday preview movie, but I heard anecdotally at the Thursday previews that people were just very ecstatic about the movie and got a great response. It's also runs pretty long, I think. So they couldn't do a ton of like, three or four showings on a Thursday night. It's probably just one or two. Who showed up for this? 62% male, 38% female. How does that relate to a general movie? It's over indexing on males pretty significantly. Usually they're about like 53% of the audience. So this is a lot higher. 80% over 25, which is, it's skewing very old. 20% under 25. Usually that's more like a 66-34 split. In terms of the ethnic breakdown here of who showed up, 66% white people. That's much higher than a normal movie. Normally it's about 55%. Latinos were down from normal. They're at 13% for Ford versus Ferrari. Normally they're low 20s. Asian others usually about 10%. They're at 14 here. It's funny, like over index on the white people, under index on Latinos and African Americans is essentially what happened. Asian other was pretty kind of flat. So let's talk about let's take a big step back here and say, what happened. If you're really interested in the nuances of how this got released and the marketing stuff, definitely read the Deadline write-up because they do a phenomenal job of contextualizing marketing campaigns, how this got made. They talk, and the thing is, everybody in the industry reaches out to Deadline. So they have huge pull quotes from the director this morning, and some other people involved at 20th Century Fox. I mean, it's kind of a little chummy because they're in the industry, but it's really fascinating to read to get that context. There's some big takeaways from this. One, Christian Bale and Matt Damon are still bankable stars. I think they're one of the big reasons that people showed up for this. If you had two random people in this role, it wouldn't have worked. It's kind of like maybe two C-level stars or kind of throwaway younger stars. It just would not have played as well. I think the story itself is a little bit of a tough sell. Historical back to the 1960s. How many people are gearheads that really know about this race and know about the history of Ford and Ferrari very well. I mean, America is a car culture, but we're not that into it probably. So it was an interesting story, but you needed those two stars up front to really sell it. The director in the quote with Deadline this morning was talking about how, getting the amount of money needed to make this film was very tough. Because, the box office right now is dominated by what? It's dominated by comic book movies and sort of, reboots to some degree, but sequels, MCU, DCEU. Think about the big winners this year so far. Think about what's coming out next week, Frozen 2. That's the type of stuff that we're seeing win. The adult drama, which if you're a younger person, if you're under the age of 30 or under 25, you probably weren't around to see this. But, 10, 15, 20 years ago, Ford versus Ferrari would be a very typical release. It'd be shooting for the over 30s. Adults with money to spend want to see a movie. They go 4 or 5 times a year. This would be one of their movies. So that was usually the play. We don't see that very often anymore, which makes this win kind of a little bit more rare and special. In terms of marketing and stuff, I thought the first trailer was good. But this is a great lesson on how to market a film. The first trailer was very sort of standard Hollywood, gives you a general overview. Oh, here, Matt Damon, here's Christian Bale, blah, blah, blah. Here's the overview of the story. I thought it was good. That second trailer, and I can't remember where it landed, might have been September, where Matt Damon's walking up to Christian Bale and they get into this sort of verbal back and forth, and then they literally get into a fist fight, sold the movie for me. And I guarantee you it sold the movie for half the audience, it feels like. That is a good lesson in hook. You have to have a hook, because going into the first trailer, you're like, okay, historical. I like these actors, but what's this really about? I'm not really a car person. Do I really want to see this? And in that second trailer, what did they sell? They sold character and an interesting dynamic and conflict, and it hooks you in immediately. Why are they fighting? What's going to happen? Are they going to get back to it? It already gets your mind churning and you're bought into the story before you even know what it's really about. And so just a masterclass really on marketing here from, I guess it would have been Disney. I know what happened is that, so it's weird. So what we've seen over the last 4 or 5 months is that a lot of the Fox movies have been not exactly treated well by Disney as this transition has happened, as they've been absorbed by Disney. Stuber would be one where they sort of like threw it away. Ad Astra kind of felt that way too. Like Disney didn't know what to do with it. With this one, I heard that Disney really liked the movie. And so I think they went all out to support it. And you'd see that in the marketing. So this is, if I do like a kind of anti-postmortem, or it's like, why did this win? One, it's definitely, if you think about product conception, that was probably the toughest sell here. It's like, this story is not exactly super well known. Is it going to be interesting to a lot of people? I think it's kind of a tough sell on paper. And the director, I think, even said that. But what they did in terms of the quality here, look at the critic score, look at the verified audience score, amazing script, amazing acting, amazing directing. They hit the grand slam to sort of overcome the problems with the product conception part of it, or the whole idea of it, which was kind of a little bit esoteric and not an easy sell. In terms of marketing, talked about that a little bit already, but like they definitely inundated us with different types of collateral or whatever, different channels and mediums of marketing. These guys, Matt Damon and Christian Bale, were all over the place. Matt Damon especially, who loves, almost like he just loves doing the marketing stuff with the press stuff. So he was on Jay Leno's garage show, and they really played up the sort of gearhead angle, people in NASCAR and cars in general. They did like a whole thing with driver influencers, social media influencers who are super into cars and stuff. They did that. So I think the quality was there. I think they had a little bit of a misstep with that first trailer. It looked interesting, but the second trailer basically sold probably like, I feel like half of this take is from that trailer. It feels like, so you just never know. I think it's, where's this going to go? How's this movie going to play out over the long run? At least a 4x multiple, which is very high, but like I'm very confident in thinking that this, with an A+ cinema score and that verified audience score of a 99%, an actual score in the high 90s, that like the normal 3x multiple for something like this is not really going to stick, which would put it at like $90 million or 91, something in that range. I think this pushes way past that. And I think because of the timing of the release, we're so early in the awards cycle that this thing is going to have legs for days. I mean, it's just going to run and run. Unlike a Ford these days. Okay, so 31 right now. I would say 4x would be a good target. 125 domestically. I think because of the timing of it, there is a possibility that it does like a 4 or 5x multiple, which would put it at like 140-ish. That's what I'm going to call right now. I think it's going to be 140. If it does get a Best Picture nom, let's talk about that really quickly. This is now the Best Picture frontrunner. The reaction from the audience, the critics, the box office performance, the type of story, the actors involved, all the chips are on Ford versus Ferrari right now as sort of the front. I guarantee you it's going to get a nom now. Does it win? Something else has to come along and displace it, because right now it's the front runner. So I think that 140 is a possibility, but if it does get that nom in early January, comes back in theaters, keeps playing, then there's a chance that it could go higher into the 150s range, which is just a wonderful performance for this film. Okay, let's go to number 2 here, which was Midway from Lionsgate, $8.7 million on the weekend, a 51% drop, which is pretty average. It has made $35 million so far. I got a bump from Veterans Day last week. So overall, Lionsgate probably is just in love with the performance of this film, because there's a chance that this thing was really going to bomb, but I think they financially set it up like they always do somehow to make good money on movies like this. I think they sold foreign rights on it completely. So this is a good performance. Like, is it a breakout? Not necessarily in the traditional sense. Its per theater average is $2,700 on its second weekend. That's like not an outstanding performance, but if you contextualize what the movie is, who directed it, Roland Emmerich, it's a World War II movie, which are just not that like in anymore. Especially sort of this, like I talked about this, the reverential sort of take on them. It's more like parody, like Jojo Rabbit or like Overlord uses sort of like a vibe for a film. Something straightforward like Midway doesn't usually come along too much anymore. But $35 million for this domestically, it's doing pretty well, I think, overseas. Maybe not so well in China, but it's a very solid performance. I think Lionsgate's going to be very happy about it. Number 3 was another new wide release here, Charlie's Angels, bombing at $8.6 million for the weekend, a per theater average in its first weekend of only $2,500. This is bad. And it's, Deadline has an entire 1,000-word article about why this movie bombed. But let's sort of quickly go over the facts for Charlie's Angels. Directed by Elizabeth Banks from Sony Pictures, Rotten Tomatoes score here of a 59% from all critics. Also a 59 score, terrible. Top critics was a little bit worse, 54%, 56 actual score. Verified audience score was an 81% and an 82 score. All audience was a 60% and 66 score. Sony might be up to something here. This is always the issue with Rotten Tomatoes verified audience score. Let me explain it really quick. So verified audience score, you can only do if you buy your ticket for that movie from Fandango. Now, that it's much better than the scores were before, which anybody could rate a movie online, so it could totally be brigaded or manipulated in a lot of different ways. You can't really do that as well with verified audience score. You have to go through the work. But I'm looking at this score of verified audience with people bought tickets, 81%, 82 score versus the all audience score, which is open to everybody, a 60%, 66 score. There's one of two things happening. One, Sony is paying somebody to buy tickets on Fandango and rate it highly. That's one possibility. Two, maybe that score is accurate and people are brigading it because they're just the whole Gamergate, alt-right, 4chan people hate women, so they downvote movies with all women cast. I don't know. One of those is happening because that discrepancy is kind of you don't really often see that sort of issue. Cinema score of a B+, that makes me kind of think it might be a brigading thing from the alt-right because B+ kind of lines up with an 81% verified audience. Post-track was lower though at 60%. So we don't really know what the full story is here with the audience reaction. Letterboxd at a 62. That is compared to Charlie's Angels back in whatever was that, 2000 or something, with a 52. Charlie's Angels Full Throttle in 2003, that sequel, 50 score on Letterboxd. I thought this really lined up well with Kingsman, the last two Kingsman's movies. They seem very similar. It's kind of action, adventure, comedy, spies and stuff involved. So Kingsman, Golden Circle, those most recent one got a 60. The original Kingsman Secret Service got a 74, very high on Letterboxd. I did not know the film snobs liked it that much. So this one's at a 62, not super well received with the snobs and film nerds. Critics didn't like it that much. We're not really sure about audiences, but what we do know is they didn't show up. So tracking on this was $12 to $13 million. It's just under $9 million now. That's not good. The marketing for this, Deadline has, again, a phenomenal write-up about why this thing failed. They also have these great pieces of information. One is that the original marketing budget for Charlie's Angels, this reboot, I guess it's a reboot or is it a sequel? I don't really know. I guess it's more of a reboot. Was $100 million, which is nothing to scoff at for a marketing worldwide campaign. Usually for a wide release, big tentpole movie, you're talking 120, 130, 140 up on higher. MCU's probably higher than 150. At 100, that was a pretty substantial outlay to market this thing on a worldwide release. Something happened where test screenings didn't go well. They cut that in half. So they actually spent about $50 million to market this thing. Production cost was right around that too. 48 they say, but Deadline says they have sources that said it was in the mid 50s to produce this. So a lot of money sort of put on the line here for this movie, and they balked at the last second because they knew something wasn't right. They pulled out $50 million. They probably saved $50 million by cutting that marketing budget in half. Who showed up for this? 66% female, 34% male. That makes sense. It is a very female centric movie. So let's talk about what happened overall with this. Deadline, in their reasoning, they pull out a couple of, I think, of really key points at why Charlie's Angels has failed and flopped at the box office. Early on when this got released and Kristen Stewart was involved and Elizabeth Banks, who's a famous actress who has gotten into directing recently. I think she did the last Pitch Perfect movie, which was really very well received. And I think she's, a very talented director. She seemed like a good fit for Charlie's Angels, and she also plays I forget whatever the person's role is in the movie. Kristen Stewart is a little bit odd because she had the Twilight sort of phase of her career. She has completely moved on from that and is much more into arty films and stuff like that. And she's a very talented actress and has done quite well in the art house scene, which is not something you would see. And Robert Pattinson's the same way. Like, it's so ironic that these two Twilight sort of teen heartthrobs or whatever have become like art house movie icons. It's kind of crazy. In any event, just the conception of the film. One, why are you doing Charlie's Angels again? Like, we had the reboot back in the early 2000s, and let's take a look at those numbers really quick. So, Charlie's Angels, the first sort of movie, was big. Came out November 3rd, 2000. I sort of remember it coming out. Did $40 million unadjusted that weekend. That's a huge opening, right? Domestic box office was 125, which is good, but like when you adjust that for inflation, it did 211 domestic box office. Worldwide is 259 unadjusted. So over $200 million in today's money. The first one, that's a huge performance, right? So that's what they did the sequel 3 years later, June 27th, Charlie's Angels Full Throttle. That had a much bigger budget. Well, not much bigger, but $120 million overall. That had a similar opening weekend of $37 million opening weekend. Inflation adjusted domestic box office was at 152. So definitely underperformed significantly from the original, which is why we didn't get a third one. Now, the Charlie's Angels movies, if you haven't seen them, and this is a point that Deadline brings up, were very action driven. So back then, you really had to sell it with explosions. I mean, that's just how it worked. These movies were marketed as popcorn blockbuster films, and that's kind of how they worked. This one, it just did not have that same excitement to it. It was almost like more cerebral, more comedic, which is interesting because it reminds me a little bit of the Ghostbusters reboot, which was sold as more of a comedy and less of an action comedy. When the original, the action pieces were pretty amazing. And not that there wasn't action in the reboot of Ghostbusters, it just wasn't sold that way. And I think the same thing is happening with Charlie's Angels. If you are going to remake something and take this sort of, it's a cool story. I don't know if the TV series even registers to people under 30 years old. Probably not. I don't even know if the reboots, they remember those as well because they weren't good movies. Like, they did very well, but the type of movie that like you go out and see and you don't remember you saw it a year later. Just those types of movies. So there's a lot writing going against this movie overall. I think it could have worked if you had more bankable stars up front. I think Kristen Stewart was a great addition to this cast, but you needed probably one or two more anchors. Elizabeth Banks isn't enough to sell it, I don't think, at all. And so you needed more stars. I think Deadline brings this up as a huge problem. The script wasn't very good. I think that's one of the reasons they couldn't attract bigger names. So I think there you have an issue. You got to have a great story. It's got to be, and that's one thing that like I've noticed recently with films and TV in general, because we're just sort of inundated with content. The quality of writing overall is completely dropped off the map. I mean, it's just like, it's not good anymore. And like, if you don't have good writing and a good foundation to your story, then the rest of the movie is just super hard to make good. And I think, there's a whole slew of problems with Charlie's Angels, this reboot. I think if I had to pinpoint the exact problem why it flopped is you never hooked people in. And they didn't hook people in because there wasn't really anything interesting going on in the trailer. There wasn't really interesting anything in the concept. The concept was basically like, hey, let's take this movie that you might have saw 15 years ago that wasn't very good, and let's redo it with new people. And oh yeah, we're going to have Kristen Stewart. That was it. That was the selling point. That's not good enough. It's not even the ballpark of being good enough. That's why it failed. It just did not convince people that this was worth seeing and spending $15 for. And there's a lot of work they had to do to get there. And I don't even think they were really close, which is why this thing is opening under $10 million. And I think it's going to also just kind of collapse too with big drops coming in the next few weeks. In any event, so that was number 3. Number 4 here was Playing with Fire. They're kind of head to head. 2, 3, 4 are like right neck and neck with each other. Playing with Fire did $8.5 million, current estimate. 33% drop, fantastic drop. It is a children's movie, so that's kind of expected that it's going to be kind of under 40% drop or under. $27 per theater average, almost $26 million here domestically by the end of today. That's a good performance overall. I mean, what did you expect from a movie like that? The marketing wasn't really there. It's not a big push. I hope they didn't spend a ton on marketing because there's no way they're going to recoup that. But I think they sort of realized they had like a third tier children's film and sort of have treated it that way. And it's performing well in that context. Number 5 was Last Christmas from Universal. 41% drop. That's good. In its second weekend here, it's made $22.5 million. Per theater average is nasty though. Under $2,000 per theater in a second weekend. This is not going to stick around. I've heard good things anecdotally that people really liked it. Big twist in the movie, I think, apparently. So sometimes people either like that or hate it. But it's not performing all that well. It's not breaking out at all. Expectation on this one, I thought would be like opens at 15, closes out at 45, 50. That's not going to happen. It's going to be struggle to make up like 35-ish. Dr. Sleep was number 6, 6.1 million. A 56% drop in its second weekend. This is a disaster. I mean, there's already been sort of numbers thrown out. It's going to lose $30 million, $50 million. I think that's bullshit. I think it's going to lose more than that. It's performing so poorly right now. Nobody went out to see this. I did a whole postmortem last weekend. I'm still kind of confused by its poor performance because, it's interesting. Horror movie fans seem to love it. The sort of film snobs, which is a little bit different, they seem to like it as well. There's been a lot of sort of chatter on it on Twitter, at least in the circles that I follow, that it is a good movie and a good experience. It never crossed out of that horror subculture. Just didn't cross over because those people know about The Shining. They kind of know the background. They follow the development of films. So they saw this one coming up. They're like, yeah, I got to see this. Good director, good cast, long runtime, but like whatever. It's that happens. Ford versus Ferrari has a similar runtime, I think. So that's no real excuse. It's just something did not click here. I think the blame really has to be laid on Warner Brothers on their marketing. They really mismarketed this thing, did not play up the Shining part of it enough. They should have called it The Shining Dr. Sleep or Shining 2. And it sounds stupid and lame, but like, dude, marketing 101. What the fuck is Dr. Sleep? Nobody knows what that is. They just did not play it well. So that's a disaster. And I think I would expect to see articles saying $70, $100 million loss here in the next couple of weeks because it is not going well. Number 7 was a new wide release, also from Warner Brothers, also a flop. The Good Liar did $5.6 million, $2,300 per theater. Not good. Adult drama. Audience on this one was 82% over 25, so obviously skewed older. 60% female. Production budget was $10 million, so it's not going to be a huge loss. 64% from critics. Top critics give it 54%. Verified audience score was higher, 86%. All audience was 77%. Cinema score of a B, post drag of 80%, Letterboxd is at 60 out of 100. So story there is critics are kind of muted on it. It's an interesting no man's land for this one. You compare it to Ford versus Ferrari, which is, both adult dramas, focused on people over 30. The Quad is over 25, but this is more like an over 30, over 40 movie. For this one didn't work for a lot of reasons. One, it's not a great movie. Like, critics aren't loving it. For an adult drama to do well in this environment at the box office, it has to be outstanding. Has to be well over an 80% Rotten Tomato score. That doesn't have it here. So it's not going to break out. People aren't going to get hyped for it. They're not going to show up. The people who do see it are people who probably don't see a ton of movies. And they went out and they saw it and they liked it. 86% verified audience score. It's not bad. All audience a little bit lower at 77. They're just, there's not a lot of room for movies like this. And the only way that you're going to be successful with a film like this that skews older, that's a sort of straightforward adult drama thriller, is it has to be outstanding. And even then, you're not guaranteed to win. It's even then it's slim pickings at the box office for these type of genre films. And they didn't hit a home run. They didn't even, I think from a marketing perspective too, they didn't even try to hit a home run. So I don't know what they were thinking, Warner Brothers, with this one. They did this. Goldfinch was also kind of a similar situation, massive flop. I don't know. I'm not sure how this movie fits into the current marketplace. I don't think that it does. So I don't know why they made it. Maybe some sort of contractual obligation or something like that to release it. But this is more like a I don't even know where this fits on like streaming. There's a place for it on streaming somewhere. I just don't know where. It's not really a Netflix film. Maybe like an Amazon Prime movie. They tend to play up the sort of Tom Clancy spy type stuff. So maybe it's in that world. But I just don't see it as a wide release from Warner Brothers. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And you can tell because people did not show up for it. Okay, that was 7. Number 8 was Joker, still crushing, 39% drop, $5.6 million on the weekend, $322 million domestically. Like I've always been saying, this is the top 3 big story of the box office this year. I mean, it's a massive performance. It has crossed the $1 billion mark worldwide. So just $694 million worldwide, internationally alone. It's an amazing performance. And I do think it's going to realign the whole genre of comic book movies. This and Logan, to me, point a totally new direction that they can go in to keep the genre sort of fresh for the next 5-10 years or something like that. It's definitely a new wave in comic book movies. It's awesome and exciting to see. Number 9 was Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, 38% drop, 5.2 million. It's kind of hanging on, isn't it? I didn't expect it to hang on this well. $106 million here domestically. Per theater average is just around $2,000. So it's just sort of skimming by. $460 million internationally. Break-even point on that movie, I have no idea. It had super high budget. I imagine they're probably getting close to breaking even, but probably more in the $600 million range. It'll be on Disney Plus in no time. I wonder if Disney Plus had like an effect on the box office. When you think, I don't know, probably not. Maybe though, because I'm not a huge Disney fan, and I got it right away. I was like, I have to see what's going on this thing. I've already watched Frozen and Noelle with 2 movies. I was like, why am I watching these films? That's why I got Disney Plus. Why not? Okay, so that was number 9. Number 10 was Harriet. Still sticking around, 35% drop, which is good. 4.7 million, $32 million for Harriet. That's a really great performance out of that one. And I think if it gets some awards, it's going to keep going for a while. So that's awesome. Let's talk limited really quickly before we jump over to Chris with the Time Machine. Jojo Rabbit sticking around, 2.8 million, 29% drop, great drop, decent expansion. It's at like 1,000 theaters right now. That's not bad at all. 13, almost $14 million for Jojo Rabbit. Okay performance. I thought it could go a lot higher. I thought it could be a big breakout. That's not going to happen. Parasite still crushing, 25% drop, 15. How does Parasite have $15 million in the domestic market? I mean, and people have been just gushing about it on Twitter, and Letterboxd score is probably like an 85 or something. It's doing quite well. I think its awards prospects are fantastic now based on this performance. And it's not making $100 million, but like $15 million for that type of film is really, really good. Lighthouse, Mother's Brooklyn is just completely fallen off it's made nothing. $8.8 million overall, despite Edward Norton's like full forced press campaign that he's been doing the last couple of weeks. Has not worked out well for him. Lighthouse sits at $9.7 million so far. Per theater average is not great, $1,300. That's not going to go anywhere, so it's kind of a dead end. Honey Boy, this is the Shia LaBeouf autobiographical pick. Added 13 theaters this weekend, so this was the big test. Can it play well? Had that amazing, $70K per theater average? Not doing so hot right now, only sitting at about like $12K per theater, so that one's not going to break out. Okay, that's limited releases. Let's turn it over to Chris for the Time Machine.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Wildline Time Machine. My name is Chris. Thanks, Dan, as always, for having me on the Wildline podcast to talk about the American box office, both past and future. I've got another doozy for you. I try to look for kind of the weirdest box office weekend from the past on the 5s or 10s. This is the 30th anniversary of the movies that came out in 1989. The 45th weekend of the year correlates approximately with what just happened this weekend. Number 1, wow. Movie I totally forgot about and still have yet to see, and I don't think there's much reason to reconcile that. The first weekend of this movie, it made $16 million opening weekend on a $30 million budget, so it was on its way to become a hit. It didn't, make a huge amount of money, but it did wind up with $55 million at the end of the year, number 18 out of all the films released in 1989. It's Eddie Murphy's Harlem Nights. When people say, Eddie Murphy, golden age of comedy, 1980s, this is not one of the ones that you think about, right? You think about Coming to America, which came out the year previously, in 1988, made $128 million. The Beverly Hills Cop series, the second one came out the year before that in 87, made $153 million. Eddie Murphy could do no wrong at the end of this decade, and so Paramount gave him a good amount of cash, and he even directed this film, Harlem Nights. It's his only directorial credit to his name, probably for the reason of just how utterly trashed it got by the critics. I've got a quote from Roger Ebert when it came out. There is not an original idea in the movie from one end to the other. Opening line of his Chicago Sun-Times review. Brutal stuff. 2 thumbs down from Roger and Ebert. It just, this is not a movie that you would hope to be kind of the pinnacle of your decade of glory as America's comedy darling. And especially from Paramount, they were having a pretty good year. They had Major League come out earlier that year with $49 million, Pet Sematary, the original, with $57 million. Like they were like the cream cheese of the modest box office hits, and a lot of those movies or IPs became pretty legendary from that decade. But yeah, maybe they didn't care because it still made a decent amount of money. Like I said, number 18 out of the year. Why did they let Eddie Murphy do like a gangster style comedy film with all his friends? Why wouldn't you? You let Eddie Murphy do what he wants to do, but it just seems like of all the different possibilities you could have Eddie Murphy take on complete. He had his own production studio set up for this film, and yet he bombed it. Also coming out that year, I kind of looked at some other comparable comedies, more adult comedies. You had the hugely successful War of the Roses with Danny DeVito, made $86 million. See No Evil, Hear No Evil with Richard Pryor, who also co-starred in Harlem Nights, $49 million. And so yeah, like it wasn't a dud, but it definitely has not stayed the test of time, right? Too bad. Number 2 that weekend, in its 6th week of release. Number 2 spot in the box office, 6th week of release with $8 million on a $7 million budget. Number 6 overall of the year, $126 million total on a, once again, $7 million budget. This is insane. It's from TriStar. Look Who's Talking. Yeah, what a piece of crap. And yet it has, I think that movie has had still continually affected the way that especially family comedies are made ever since it came out. Other comedy movies, more of the family angle that came out in that year, Uncle Buck with $66 million, Christmas Vacation with $71 million, and Ghostbusters 2 with $112. Like, this movie beat out Ghostbusters 2 and Christmas Vacation. And also it was directed by a woman, Amy Heckerling. A lot of people forget, like, she was kind of the darling of kind of white-centric comedies in the 1980s. Fast Times at Ridgemont High made $27 million on a, I think it was a $4 million budget. She went on direct National Lampoon's European Vacation, made $49 million. Like, she was pretty reliable to churn out these kinds of studio comedies, and yet it just didn't really, once again, hit the critical acclaim. But that does not seem to have as much of effect on movies in the 80s as it does today. TriStar was having a pretty good year also. They had Steel Magnolias come out to amass $83 million. Who's Harry Crumb, on the other hand, one of my perennial favorites from Blockbuster Video, or the gas station video store if Blockbuster was too far to bike, came out the same year, only made $10 million. But this was a huge hit for TriStar outside of, the major 4 studios. And TriStar is still kind of kicking today. I assumed that they had folded at some point along the way, but they were still making movies as recent as 2017. So good for them. The Little Mermaid. This is insane, guys. The Little Mermaid, Disney's iconic film from Walt Disney Animation Studios. It opened this weekend back in 1989. It only made $6 million its opening weekend. Number 3 of the box office. Look Who's Talking and Harlem Nights both beat out The Little Mermaid. $40 million budget. Pretty modest for a huge Disney movie. It was still, end up making $51 million, so more than recouped its budget, but still, $51 million? That's it? For The Little Mermaid, number 23 film of the year, 1989. Compare that to Oliver and Company that came out the year before. It made $74 million. Oliver and Company, nobody's asking for a live action or realistic reimagining of Oliver and Company, and yet, they made Secret Life of Pets, which was just a ripoff. But you know what I mean? It's this is insane. The Little Mermaid was not as big of a hit as I think I remember as a kid. But of course, it was still a bigger hit than the next Disney movie, which nobody remembers. DuckTales: Legend of the Lost Lamp only made $18 million at the box office. That kind of sealed the deal for making no more Disney afternoon shows into movies. But also, this is coming off the heels of Roger Rabbit in 1988. That made $156 million. So Disney, they were not too sad about the Little Mermaid's modest box office recoup, but it's insane. It actually came from like the B grade team of Disney Animation Studios. Ron Clements and John Musker, they had previously made The Great Mouse Detective and Black Cauldron, both, once again, modest Disney hits. Neither of those are iconic films. $50 million for Great Mouse Detective and $36 million for Black Cauldron. Compare this to like other 1989 animation films. It was still the biggest one. All Dogs Go to Heaven came out in 1989, which is semi-memorable, I guess. It only made $27 million, though. Little Nemo and the Adventures of Slumberland. I vividly remember seeing this movie and being psyched because I read the book in school. That only made $11 million. And think about also the voice cast. This was a nobody. Jodie Benson was chosen to play the lead of Ariel, and the only other thing she had done at that point was an English dub of the Miyazaki film Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind in 1984. So, they just picked a nobody. There's not this kind of clamoring for a big name in the lead role in animation films like we see today. Absolutely insane stuff. Let's take a look at the future, guys. Probably the biggest story coming out of Greenlight Central this week was yet again another Nicolas Cage movie. I know I just talked a couple weeks ago about a different Nicolas Cage movie. This week, this guy is making so many movies. I cannot does this man sleep? I don't know. But he's just making crap after crap after crap, and he DGAF. I don't know. The news about his new movie is a big deal because it's a meta take on the Nicolas Cage brand, so to speak. It's called The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. It's going to be directed by Tom Gormican, who had only made that Jake Johnson film, That Awkward Moment, back in 2014, which I thought was a flop, but actually made $40 million, so not too bad. But this is also the guy behind that Dearly Departed, not Dearly Departed, I never watched this, that show Ghosted on Fox last year, which Fox kind of screwed it over, but also I heard from people that had watched it, I didn't see an episode myself, that it was just, it was weak, even though it had Craig Robinson and Adam Scott in the lead roles. This kind of supernatural comedy was both thrown around by Fox as far as air times and what slot it got on which day, and also just apparently was not that great. But they're giving this guy this kind of big project that's getting a lot of buzz. But once again, Nicolas Cage does a lot of crap, right? None of the movies he made this year so far have made over $1 million. He's doing the Z grade stuff. A movie called Running with the Devil opened in just a few cities to recoup $45K. Mandy last year, of course, made over $1 million because of all its critical acclaim. Left Behind back in 2014 only made $14 million. The last movie he's made that's made over $20 million, it's not an animated film, was Ghost Rider 2 Spirit of Vengeance back in 2012, $51 million. So he's not a bankable talent, and yet the meta nature of this is getting some people excited because he plays himself, desperate to get a role in the new Tarantino film. He's got a strained relationship with his daughter. He has this figment of his imagination, which is the 1990s version of himself that was in Con Air and Face Off and stuff. So who knows? Obviously, it totally depends on the marketing, doesn't it? That's coming out of Saturn Films, Lionsgate co-production, which, as you may or may not recall, I certainly didn't until I looked it back up. National Treasure was Saturn Films' Lionsgate co-production, distributed by Paramount, of course, but Nicolas Cage was huge still, not just in the 90s, but all the way until the 2000s. $173 million for National Treasure plus a sequel, right? Then compare that to what Saturn Films is doing nowadays. Score to Settle was their latest film, also starring Nicolas Cage. Only made $30K. Of course, they're trying to recoup their costs on VOD, but I think they've fallen greatly, and they're trying to rebrand as this kind of goofy B-movie style studio, but they've got to move from Z to B. Drive Angry came out in 2011, only made $10 million. They have been on a downward trajectory ever since the big success of National Treasure. So then also we've got coming out next year, speaking of kind of reboots, of stars, this joint production between Matt Damon and Ben Affleck coming back together again as a duo for a film aptly titled The Last Duel. To be directed by Ridley Scott, this is about when King Charles VI declared that Knight Jean de Carouge settled his dispute with him by challenging him to a duel. So old clothes, medieval fighting, Ridley Scott's shaky cam. I don't know, man. I'm not very interested in it, but it's being lined up with Christmas, so who knows? Maybe it'll get some award season buzz next year. It does not sound very exciting to me. Let's take a look at what Matt and Ben have been up to. Obviously, Matt's in Ford v Ferrari that came out this weekend and seems to be poised to be a hit both critically and box office wise. But then also look like the last things Matt was on, he was very quiet in 2018. 2017, he did both Downsizing and Suburbicon. Downsizing only made 24 mil, didn't end up getting much awards buzz despite being directed by Alexander Payne. Suburbicon was a complete monster misfire. $5 million was its final box office take. And then of course Ben, what's he been doing besides Batman and the Justice League? I mean, of course that movie made $228 million, but he kind of slept through the role as he did in Batman v Superman. But then look back at 2016. This was a surprise. I'd totally forgotten that his movie The Accountant was a huge hit for what it was, a political thriller. I don't know, I never saw it. $86 million. So maybe the team up when the Good Will Hunting nostalgia will make people come out and see this, maybe the historical angle. I don't know. This seems like quite the gamble. I have little interest, and I see lots of trashy movies. It's coming from Pearl Street and Scott Free, Ridley Scott's production studio. What have they been up to? They're also putting out another Ben Affleck movie, a sports drama called The Way Back next year. They also put out Ben Affleck's Dennis Lehane noir adaptation Live by Night back in 2016, which was a flop, 22 million. But then they also had a really good gamble go tremendously well for them, Manchester by the Sea, 79 million for this like really sad, slow movie about the Casey Affleck right in the midst of his Me Too scandal. So who knows? They also put out The Aftermath this year that only made $9 million. I didn't even hear about it coming out, and I try to know everything that's coming out. So who knows what they're going to be. That could be a flop like The Great Wall with Matt Damon. Who knows? Last thing I want to talk about is a movie called Treat Street. This is actually probably the one I'm most excited about as a dad. This is a family adventure film with a plot that you'd be surprised has not been a family adventure film. It's pretty straightforward. Kids and their parents seek revenge on the teenagers that stole their kids' candy on Halloween. And it's going to be Joel McHale and Thomas Lennon as the parents. They'll probably pick some Good Boys style actors to play the kids. And it just seems like, of course, it could be trash. It could be completely forgettable. But you make it funny enough and you have the right people on the script, it could be a hit, and it could be pretty entertaining. They're putting Stimson Sneed in the director role. This is his debut. He's gotten a lot of buzz in Hollywood for his short films and television work, but he has yet to do anything of real notable cachet. So we'll see how that goes. So Joel McHale and Thomas Lennon, they are not bankable stars, right? Thomas Lennon has written a ton of successful Hollywood scripts, but Joel McHale has never really made it out of the TV ghetto, so to speak. He was in Happy Time Murders last year, which made $20 million. He had a small role in Ted, which was a huge hit back when that came out. Thomas Lennon was in Monster Trucks, which was a modest hit for a January monster family movie. He also made a movie this past year that I had no idea existed, a reboot of the Puppet Master series with the subtitle The Littlest Reich, which I think is hilarious, and now I want to see it. It only made $600K, once again one of those Z-grade movies that's trying to recoup expenses on VOD. I don't know. It's coming from this North by Northwest movie studio, which I had never heard of and had to kind of do some deep digging and go to their own website to figure out what they had been up to. They've been making a lot of trash. Like this seems to be the theme of this week's Wildline Time Machine. They put out Vengeance, a Love Story back in 2017. Once again, a Nicolas Cage action movie, only made $73K. I Am Wraith back in 2016 with John Travolta, or I'm sorry, I Am Wrath, trashy revenge story. Didn't make anything at the box office. There's no box office receipts on this, even for VOD streaming revenue. And then lastly, back in 2013, they put out a Peter Dinklage comedy called Knights of Badassdom, and that actually was probably their biggest hit, $123K at the box office total. So who knows? This could just be completely forgotten. It might not even get successfully made, and who knows? But it's greenlit. It's at least going to start filming in Spokane, Washington very soon, and it sounds fun, and I enjoy both Joel McHale and Thomas Lennon from their days on the Soup Community and Reno 911. But who knows? That's it for me. Thanks for listening to the Wildline Time Machine. I'll be back next week. Thanks as always to Dan for having me on the show. And you're probably hearing Lenny in the background, my son, who hopefully I'll take to Treat Street. Does that sound like a good movie, Lennox?
What sounds like a great movie?
A movie about kids who go trick-or-treating for Halloween, and then some kids steal their candy, and then their dads help them try to find it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, see, that'll be a hit. I guarantee it. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week. It's the Wildline Time Machine.
I don't even remember Harlem Nights. Look Who's Talking is a totally different story, though. That was a massive movie in the late 80s, early 90s, and then there was the sequel with dogs, I think. It was one of those films where, like, if you were young in that time period, you probably have seen that movie 50 times. I have distinct memories popping into my head of seeing Look Who's Talking in the sequel. But now it's almost like completely forgotten unless you lived through it, if that makes sense. Like, if you're under the age of like 25, you have no idea what we're talking about. Because it's never come back in sort of the conversation. Like, nobody goes back and watches those films now, right? I don't know. It's just bizarre because it was so big back then. And now that just seems like forever ago. Like, you could never make a movie like that. Maybe Boss Baby was similar to that. I don't know. Whatever. Look Who's Talking. Little Mermaid. Yeah, I mean, you got to remember that, like, Disney doing well, that was like a big bet when they got back into animation. That was not like a surefire thing that was going to work so well. And it ended up working well, but in the long run, like, Little Mermaid didn't like make, $500 million at the box office or something like that. But it sort of laid the foundation for what we're seeing now, which is kind of amazing. They really played like the long game there, and sort of set up all these sort of IPs when they weren't called IPs back then, that we're going to come back and do. We're going to get the live action Little Mermaid. You think about it this way, like, that did $6 million opening weekend. I don't know what that is adjusted for inflation, but it's not a ton probably. Think about how well the live action Little Mermaid's going to do opening weekend, because it's been in everybody's memories for the last 30 years now. It's going to be, I would say, baseline $150 million opening weekend, easy. Maybe even on higher to 180, like Beauty and the Beast did, or maybe 200 if it really just pops off. So they really played their cards well with movies like that. And why did it do so well? Why has it become a cultural touchstone for so many different people? Because it didn't perform amazingly well at the box office back then. It's just one of those movies that, maybe you didn't see it in the theater, but you certainly saw it on VHS like 100 times. Like, it was everywhere on video. And growing up in the 90s, every single child that was alive in the 90s saw that movie at least 12 times. And so then it just became a part of our sort of shared history and culture, and which is why these reboots are doing so well, or the live action remakes, because it's all sort of a part of our consciousness. The Nicolas Cage meta movie, I'm on board with that. Like, if you've not seen Mandy, like, I'm a horror film nerd, so I like that stuff in general. But everybody should see Mandy. I mean, it's so bizarre, but the opening hour is just phenomenal. Like, some of the best cinematography I saw all of last year. Beautiful colors, just a wonderfully vibey film. And Nicolas Cage is perfect in it. I love the fact that his sort of the autumn of his career, I guess it's winter now. No, he's pretty old. He's just doing whatever. I know he owes like the IRS a lot of money. That's why he's making all these movies. I kind of also get that he just doesn't care, and that he's been famous for so long. He's in that weird headspace existential zone where, like, he's famous and he's sort of playing himself. He probably doesn't even know who he is. And then, like, this meta movie just sounds like a perfect lineup for him. The Ridley Scott, Matt Damon, Affleck movie, Last Duel, I don't know. I'm not super on board with that. Like, has medieval films, have they done well recently? No. Absolutely not. What was the King Arthur one Guy Ritchie did? Like, with the biggest bomb of 2016, 2017 or something like that. I think it lost like $100 million. The medieval time space now is just not a huge win. Game of Thrones really, I think, zapped that narrative world. And people are kind of burnt by it, and they're kind of burnt out. We had Lord of the Rings, that was like 20 years ago, but it's been playing for like the last 20 years. So I don't know if the fantasy medieval environment is really ripe for a big hit anytime soon. But yeah, awesome. Time Machine, fantastic. Let's talk about what's coming out in the next couple of weeks and close out the show here. Next weekend, we have 21 Bridges, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, and Frozen 2. Frozen 2 obviously is going to win the weekend. I can't really pin down what people are saying. Deadline has tracking at 100 to 120 opening weekend on Frozen 2, but that feels like incredibly low to me. I was thinking at least 160, 170. I mean, Frozen was like the biggest movie ever. I didn't have any kids. I think I was living in New York when it came out. I didn't know any kids, except for my nephews, and you know they probably weren't that into Frozen. But like I heard about Frozen like once a week for like 2 years. So like it's one of the biggest films to come out over the last decade. I think Frozen 2 is gonna have no problem hitting like 150 opening weekend. But that may be just me be misreading the situation, but I don't think that I am at all. So I think they're way low balling tracking on that. Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. I've heard weird mixed things about this. So this is the Mr. Rogers biopic with Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers. We all love Mr. Rogers. We think about Mr. Rogers and we cry. He's just like, was a beautiful person. And interesting enough, he's like sort of the anecdote to our sort of political and social culture that's going on right now. Just a really nice, caring, loving person who helped out, you know, millions of children and sort of teaching them stuff like that. Just like the paradigm of a good man. And so you would think that this is really take off, especially with the millennial crowd. But I've heard like mixed things that it's not super great, but it's Tom Hanks. So we'll see how it does. That one's really, I'm most fascinated by that performance because if it does well, Tom Hanks is going to get a best actor nom, and best pick is on the line. But I would be nervous I was Sony because I've heard some mixed feelings about the film. 21 Bridges looks great from STX. I think STX might be finding their legs. They may have found their sea legs now as a new studio. This seems like a surefire, like mid-90s thriller, straightforward. You know, someone kills cops, got to shut down Manhattan. That's ridiculous and stupid. It would never happen. But it makes a really cool movie setup. So I think it's going to work pretty well for STX. I mean, ballpark on that opens what? I don't know, 15, 20, closes out at like 45, 50. But that's a good win for STX on that. And then to close out November, we have Knives Out and Queen and Slim on the 27th, which is what? I guess that's Thanksgiving or the day after Thanksgiving. Any limited stuff I got to sort of look up here. Nothing really, which is surprising because now would be the time. Two Popes is coming up from Netflix, but that's not going to play in any major theaters because they won't play those movies. Any Netflix movies, that is. That's weird. Yeah, there's not really a ton of limited releases coming out in the next 2 weeks, which is strange because now would be the time to start pushing those out. In any event, so, and then we're into December, Aeronauts, Million Little Pieces, which I don't know, is that like I guess that's the biopic based on the book or whatever. Remember James Fry got into huge trouble because he like made up stuff. I don't know. I don't think that's going to do very well. No one knows anything about it. Black Christmas, Jumanji. And then we're into Cats, Star Wars, Bombshell, Little Women, Spies in Disguise. It's going to be a really crowded holiday season, like always, and tons of limited stuff coming out. I think my two biggest to close out the show, most excited movies, not from a box office performance, but just from like an awards race performance. Portrait of a Lady on Fire. And Marriage Story coming out from Netflix. Portrait of a Lady on Fire is from Neon. I just feel like Portrait of a Lady on Fire is going to be amazing and phenomenal, but unfortunately I don't think it's going to get any awards praise because it's a little bit too arty for the Academy, I think. In any event, we will be back next week to talk about what happened with 21 Bridges, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, and Frozen 2. Thanks for listening. This has been the Wildline Podcast.